1959. Three British companies launched three brand new small cars within 8 weeks of each other, and every single one of them is betting on a different idea of what will make people buy it. One prices its car to lose money on every single sale. On purpose. Another makes a perfectly respectable profit, quietly does its job, and today almost nobody can tell you its name. And the third comes within a hair's breadth of bankrupting the very company that built it. This is the story of Britain's smallest cars going to war with one another, and the rather awkward truth that the one left standing at the end was by any sensible measure in the worst shape of all three. By the late 1950s, Britain had a small car problem. Fuel had been rationed as recently as 1956 after the Suez Crisis, and a generation of drivers who'd previously bought nothing smaller than a Morris Minor were suddenly very interested in economy. Three companies decided this was their moment. The British Motor Corporation had a radical, tiny, front-wheel drive design nobody else in the industry had dared attempt. Ford of Britain had a completely new engine and a car styled to look like nothing else on the road. And Standard Triumph, a company already in financial trouble, had bet its future on Italian design and a very unusual chassis. All three launched within 8 weeks of each other, in 1959. Only one of them is a household name today. The other two tell you more about how this industry actually works. The car BMC, unveiled on the 26th of August 1959, wasn't even called the Mini yet. It went on sale as two separate models, the Austin 7 and the Morris Mini Minor, badge-engineered from a single design, project code AD015, styled by Alec Isigonis. Same car, different grille, different dealer network, because BMC still hadn't quite worked out that Austin and Morris were the same company. The basic model cost £496 and 19 shillings. Less than £500 tax paid, which the adverts made sure to mention. The engine was originally meant to be 948 cubic centimetres, borrowed from the Morris Minor. BMC's chairman, Leonard Lord, decided a small car capable of 90 miles per hour was more than the public needed, so the engine was shrunk to 848 cubic centimetres to bring the top speed down to a more sensible 72. Here's the part that should have been a warning sign. Ford's engineers, alarmed at how cheap the Mini was, bought one, stripped it down to its last bolt, and costed every single component using their own manufacturing figures. Their conclusion: it cost roughly as much to build as their own Anglia, a car Ford was selling at a healthy profit, which meant BMC was losing somewhere around £30 on every single Mini they sold. About 6% of the retail price gone on day one. Ford, in a moment of what can only be described as extremely good sportsmanship, told BMC exactly what they'd found. BMC's response was to do absolutely nothing about it. You'd think losing money on every car would sink a company. It didn't sink the Mini, but it very nearly sank the company behind it, and that story starts to look a lot less funny about 40 years later. We'll come back to that. Sales in 1959 were modest, under 20,000 units in that first partial year, and only 116,000 the year after. Slow enough that a lot of people inside BMC quietly wondered if Isigonis' masterpiece was actually going to work commercially. It did eventually, spectacularly. By the time production ended in the year 2000, BMC and its successors had built more than 5,300,000 Minis, 41 years. The most successful British car ever made by volume, built on a business model that lost money on the first several 100,000 of them. While BMC was quietly manufacturing itself into a financial headache, Ford was doing something rather more sensible about 100 miles away in Dagenham. The Anglia 105E arrived on the 30th of September 1959, and it looked like nothing else on a British road. A swept-back nose, muted tail fins, and its signature feature, a rear window that sloped forwards instead of backwards. Ford borrowed the idea from contemporary American Lincolns, and claimed it gave better rear headroom and kept the glass clearer in the rain. Whether or not you believed the marketing, the effect was the same. It looked American, modern, and slightly ridiculous in the best possible way. Under the bonnet was something genuinely significant, the first of Ford's Kent engine family. a 997 cubic centimetre unit that would go on to power the Cortina, the early Escort, the Lotus Twin Cam, and about half the kit car and Formula Junior racing scene of the 1960s. Within 2 years of launch, tuning firms including Cosworth were building performance parts for an engine originally designed for a basic family runabout. The Anglia's basic price was £589, £93 more than the Mini, a 15% difference that Ford was rather smug about because unlike BMC, they were making roughly £50 of profit on every single one. Here's the thing nobody in 1959 could have predicted. The car that made a sensible profit built on solid, unglamorous engineering, that's the one that quietly disappeared from the story. And the reason has nothing to do with the car itself. Ford built just over 1 million Anglia 105Es before retiring the name in 1967, replaced smoothly and without drama by the Escort. No crisis, no committee, no last-minute rescue, just a car that did its job, made money, and got replaced on schedule, which, by the standards of the British motor industry in this era, is practically a fairy tale ending. It's also, decades later, largely remembered today for appearing as the flying car in a Harry Potter film, which is either a tragedy or the only fair outcome for a car this quietly competent. Now for the car that, on paper, should have been the sensible choice and somehow ended up being the most financially dangerous bet of the three. Standard Triumph unveiled the Herald to the press at the Royal Albert Hall on the 22nd of April 1959, 5 months before the Mini, 4 months before the Anglia. 1,500 guests hosted by Bob Monkhouse, with a team of mechanics assembling a complete car live on stage in under 5 minutes. It's the kind of launch event that makes you wonder what modern car reveals are even doing with themselves. The styling came from Giovanni Michelotti, an Italian designer largely unknown in Britain at the time, brought in because Standard Triumph's own in-house designs looked by most accounts like a mechanical bathtub. Michelotti delivered a genuinely handsome, razor-edged body with enough glass for what was advertised as 93% all-round visibility. Standard Triumph's usual body supplier had just been bought by BMC, who made it very clear they had no intention of building bodies for a rival. With no in-house pressing capacity to fall back on, Triumph's engineers made an unusual decision. Instead of the modern monocoque construction everyone else was moving toward, the Herald would use a separate steel chassis with body panels bolted on in individual sections, the entire front end, bonnet, wings, grille, hinged forward as one piece for engine access. It let Triumph build a saloon, a coupe, a convertible, an estate and a van, all from one platform. It also gave the Herald a genuinely remarkable 25-foot turning circle, tight enough to match a London black cab thanks to rack and pinion steering and new independent rear suspension using swing axles and a transverse leaf spring. Handy for London traffic, less handy for anyone who took a roundabout with more enthusiasm than sense, because the Herald had a habit of tucking its inside rear wheel under the car and reminding you why swing axles eventually went out of fashion. None of this came cheap. The saloon launched at £702, 2 shillings and sixpence, more expensive than the Mini, the Anglia, the Morris Minor, and reportedly roughly the same price as a Morgan 4.4, a proper sports car for the price of your practical family runabout. Which is a slightly odd way to sell a car to a district nurse. The Herald actually sold reasonably well at first. The press liked it, the styling worked, and the flexibility of that separate chassis meant Triumph could offer something for almost every buyer. So if the car itself wasn't the problem, what very nearly killed the company that made it? The answer arrived in the spring of 1960 in the form of a government credit squeeze that hit higher purchase lending hard, right as Standard Triumph was trying to scale up production. Sales that had reached close to 139,000 cars in the financial year from 1959 to 1960 fell off sharply. The company's response was to propose a cheaper, stripped-out Herald S model, funded partly by asking its 6,000 workers to accept a pay cut. The shop stewards rejected that unanimously in January 1961. Around the same time, the company's own bank overdraft had grown to more than a quarter of its total net assets. By early 1961, Standard Triumph was, in the words of the man who eventually rescued it, on the verge of collapse. Leyland Motors, a heavy commercial vehicle maker with no previous interest in small family saloons, stepped in with a takeover. Leyland's chairman, Sir Henry Spurrier, would later put it about as plainly as a chairman ever puts anything. In taking this concern under our wing, we have almost certainly saved it from bankruptcy. 2 months after the takeover, every member of the old Standard board bar one was asked to resign. Within another fortnight, around 300 senior staff had also been let go. Nothing reassures shareholders quite like sacking everyone who was in the room 5 minutes ago. 3 cars, one made money and vanished quietly into automotive footnote status. One lost money on paper and became the most successful British car in history. And one was priced sensibly, engineered cleverly, and still nearly took its own company down with it. So which one actually got it right? The Ford Anglia 105e, just over 1 million units built between 1959 and 1967, replaced by the Escort with no drama whatsoever and a tidy profit on every single car sold. By any conventional business measure, Ford won this round outright, and did it so competently that almost nobody talks about it 65 years later. Competence, it turns out, doesn't make for great folklore. The Triumph Herald, officially 548,291 units across saloon, coupe, convertible, estate and van, produced over 12 years until 1971. A genuinely successful car by the standards of its class, underpinning the later Vitesse, Spitfire and GT6. But its maker was absorbed into Leyland Motors within 18 months of launch, and by 1962 Standard Triumph's losses had dragged Leyland's own group profits down by over £1 million in a single year. The car survived. The company, as an independent concern, did not. And the Mini, more than 5,300,000 units over 41 years, the single most produced British car of all time, spawning Monte Carlo rally wins, a cultural identity that outlived the British motor industry itself, and decades on, is still the answer 9 out of 10 people give when you ask them to name a classic British small car. Built from day one on a pricing model that its own biggest rival concluded was financially indefensible. 1959 didn't produce one winner. It produced 3 different answers to the exact same question. How do you sell a small car to a country that had just discovered it needed one? And history rewarded the answer that had almost nothing to do with sound business planning. The Mini became a legend, not because BMC got the numbers right, but because it got almost everything else right enough that the numbers stopped mattering. Ford got the numbers right and got remembered for a rear window shaped like a boomerang. And Triumph built something genuinely clever, priced it exactly wrong, and needed a truck maker to save it before the decade was even half over. If you want the deeper story of how BMC's Mini pricing decision eventually caught up with the company, we've covered the full financial story in our Mini Cooper video. The link is on screen now. And if 3 companies racing the same deadline is the kind of story you enjoy, we're covering more of these head-to-head moments from British motoring history. Subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.